Hello, my friends. Welcome back to Resistance Live. It's the 21st of March, 2025. Oh my goodness. Yes. I'm memory holding some stuff there. Nice to see you all. Okay. So I warned you all that this was coming, that everything that was happening in the context of this deportation was going to lead to threats, if not eventual actual deportation of U.S. citizens. And lo and behold, this morning, thanks to Donald Trump, we have an official threat to deport people protesting Tesla to El Salvador. I have some things to say about this, and we're going to talk about what's happening in front of Judge Boasberg. But this is one reason why this particular round of deportations has to be dealt with by this judge through contempt. So, scary times. Many of you saw my my Substack this morning, my Fridays in Trumpland, which is about like how we get through all of this and why the fear that is being engendered right now is designed to shut us all up. But I also want to address this through the lens of what's happening to Elon Musk and Tesla and how that impacts what the administration is doing. So hold on. Today, for our visually challenged viewers, I'm wearing a white t-shirt. I have a chocolate covered. Every time I wear the sweater, you guys, chocolate colored sweater over top. My hair is down. I'm a pink skin, green eyed, dirty blonde haired woman. And I'm sitting in front of my bookshelf and my yellow utility cart and the big cushy chair. And I'm coming to you from occupied Muncie, Lenape, and Mohegan land. Okay. So, I am not surprised at all by this threat. And I will tell you why. Over the last, let's say 5 days or so, I have had a number of offline conversations with people who are people that I trust. And some of them are people who I've done mobilizing work with for like the last 10 years. Some are people who I know from my days in Washington, D.C. Some of them are just people who are really astute at evaluating the lay of the land when it comes to Donald Trump's policies. And to a T, every single one of them predicted that what is being carried out right now against green card holders, people with student visas, people who are undocumented, people who are on legal asylum status was coming for U.S. citizens next. I am not at all surprised by this statement. I also think that if he is not stopped, if Judge Boasberg doesn't stop this effort without due process to deport people without any evidence that they've committed any crime or that they have to be deported because they're here on undocumented status, which in my opinion should still not be a basis to deport them, but that's me. If this is not stopped in its tracks, American citizens will be next. And there, what's very clear here from the way in which people have been talking about this and from what we know is that the advantage of the deal that Trump has now cut with the dictator of El Salvador is that because U.S. jurisdiction doesn't extend over other countries, we can't have a judge say you got to send those people back unless they're in U.S. custody. The reality is that they can take very well-known people and also people who nobody knows the names of because they haven't released the names of any of these people who were on the planes and send them to El Salvador forever into this concentration camp that has been set up for this exact purpose. Now, do I think that that would go without immediate court intervention? No. But do I think it's entirely possible that they may try it? Yes. So the reason why this is happening, particularly with regard to Tesla protesters, is that the Tesla takedown movement, which I just want to repeat here, is a peaceful, nonviolent movement. Okay. A peaceful, nonviolent movement. I want everybody to be really clear on this. Okay. Some of you may have seen sporadic footage here and there that has been amplified of like one person doing damage at a Tesla dealership. That is not Tesla takedown. That is not what they are about. They are a joyful, peaceful, nonviolent movement. But the reason why Donald Trump is so upset about this is because what Tesla takedown has been able to achieve in terms of the plummeting of Tesla's stock price has put Elon Musk in a very precarious position. His own board, one board member on it, and presumably that means like other folks, have demanded in the last week that he choose. Either he's got to resign from Tesla, from the board of Tesla, or he's got to give up whatever kind of government servicey thing he's allegedly doing. And the other thing that comes into play here is that if Tesla stock falls far enough, the margin loans that he used to procure Twitter with Tesla stock as collateral will come due. So why does all of this matter to Trump? Well, let me just tell you all something that I think is probably pretty obvious right now, but without Elon Musk and his Nazi Youth Brigade, and that Nazi Youth Brigade, by the way, is only loyal to Musk. They're not loyal to anybody else. They're just doing Elon's bidding. If Elon is removed or stops working with Trump or is otherwise required to return to his day job, Trump will not be able to affect, I would say, arguably, and I think this is pretty good speculation, about 75% of what he's doing right now. It would immediately slow down the decimation of government because the federal government and even folks like Russ Vought don't have these kind of like engineer boys who know how to do all these things that, you know, like Elon's people know how to do. And the other thing here is that Elon, wielding as much influence as he does and as much power as he does with things like Starlink and his government contracts and his international relationships, which are huge conflicts of interest, more on that coming in a minute. Without that, it's going to be much harder to threaten organizations into compliance. And so taking Elon out of the picture by decimating Tesla is actually an incredible exploitation of a vulnerability of this ongoing coup. So someone asked me on the Patreon feed this morning and asked me yesterday on Blue Sky, and I just didn't have time to get to it, what I thought Alex Winter, one of the co-founders of the Tesla takedown movement, was referring to when he said there was an exploitation of weakness. That's it. Because if Elon is not running around the federal government with his boys and his chainsaw, a lot of what Trump is trying to accomplish and the ideologues behind him are trying to accomplish will be stopped in its tracks. So this is a very effective means of disruption and protest. And that is why Trump is so upset about it. Not because Elon's his buddy, not because he's mad. He doesn't give a good goddamn that Elon's losing money. He doesn't care about that. What he cares about is that if Elon has to go, because otherwise he's going to go bankrupt and lose all his stock, then Trump can't do what he wants to do. And Trump's ideologues and donors are going to start to get really, really upset. And who knows what comes due after that. So this in and of itself right now is a really important point of disruption. And I've said this here many times before on the broadcast, but I'm just going to say it again. Any protest action right now needs a clear goal and a clear message. And the reason why Tesla takedown has been so effective is because the goal is obvious. The goal is to exploit an enormous weakness in what Trump is up to. And that weakness is Elon. So if Elon can be taken out of the picture through protest and economic means, nonviolent protest, again, I'm just going to reiterate it, peaceful nonviolent protest, that will very quickly stall out all the implementation of Project 2025. And I personally think that this is brilliant, right? Now, do I think it's brilliant that Trump is threatening to deport U.S. citizens for protesting? Of course not. Do I think that we all need to be very, very aware that, you know, within the last week, they've made it blatantly obvious that they think they have the right to deport anyone who disagrees with them? I think it's very disturbing, like terrifying, in fact. And I don't think there's anybody who can deny that, you know, that message is something that they intend to carry out if they are given the bandwidth to do it. So we're going to have to watch what happens in the courts. And I have a quick update on that, by the way, in the coming days, because things are moving very quickly. But also keep in mind that the reason why they have already deported people like this professional soccer player who had a Real Madrid tattoo that they claimed meant that it was a gang tattoo and therefore they could deport him. Okay. The reason why they are doing that is to terrify everyone into silence, because they're essentially saying, if we say you're a terrorist, even without evidence, without presenting it to a judge, no due process, we can put you on a plane and send you wherever we feel like it. Forever. We're going to disappear you. Like, this is Assad's regime, right? That's the model. So, again, I have to remind you that fear is being engendered to try to keep people quiet. And they can't deport everyone, right? And they have not yet, at least as far as we know, tried to deport a U.S. citizen. But are they ramping up to do that if they're not stopped? Absolutely. Okay, so let's talk for a second about what's happening in Judge Boasberg's courtroom, because I wasn't here yesterday, as you all know, and there were developments yesterday. So Judge Boasberg has given the government now 2 separate days to respond to his inquiry about the fact that they defied his court order, telling them to turn the planes around that were headed to El Salvador on Saturday night. In their second brief, they raised a novel legal argument that they had not raised before. Every other argument that they made, Boasberg was like, nope, absolutely not. But they raised one novel legal argument, and he has now given them until Tuesday to brief it. I'm going to tell you right now that Judge Boasberg is very pissed off. It is extremely clear from what he has said on the record and what is contained in the orders that he knows that they are intentionally evading enforcement of the order. This case is the one that right now is right up to the line of contempt. And I would not be at all surprised to see a contempt order drop next Tuesday or Wednesday as a result. I don't think there's any dispute here that they are trying to keep from Judge Boasberg, because one of the things they filed was under seal, apparently, and Judge Boasberg said nothing that was contained in what you gave me under seal was any different from what you gave me yesterday. It's very clear right now that Boasberg is entirely conscious of the fact that they are seeking to evade the court order and to give him information that they know will subject them to contempt of court. So this is absolutely one to watch. And, the good news is that all planes are right now prohibited from taking off and deporting people to El Salvador as a result under the Alien Enemies Act. We will have to see what Judge Boasberg does with this, but I will say one other thing. Trump's people would not be asking the DC Circuit, which, by the way, is going to hear this, that's the appeals court, on Tuesday as well, to remove Chief Judge Boasberg from the district court case if they didn't know what they had done. Because asking an appeals court to remove a judge in the immediate aftermath of an order like this is absolutely unprecedented and unheard of. The similar claims that we talked about on Wednesday about demanding that he be impeached is all about the fact that they know that they broke that order within minutes of the judge issuing it. So again, we're going to have some upcoming hearings and orders on this early next week that are going to make plain what's coming next. I'm going to remind you all, contempt of court can include jail time for lawyers and for clients. We'll have to see what happens with that. All right. So let's just talk for a second about some other really crazy breaking news, which is that late last night, the New York Times reported that Elon Musk was going to the Pentagon, to the Department of Defense today, and he would receive a top secret security briefing outlining operational plans in the event that we went to war with China. Now, there are all sorts of things about this that are crazy outrageous, right? Elon Musk doesn't have security clearance. He could never get security clearance because of all of his conflicts of interest and all of his international ties, including his deep business relationships, multiple relationships with the Chinese. Okay, so this whole thing is not at all normal. And as soon as it was leaked, the Department of Defense was like, he's just coming to visit Secretary Hegseth, right? He's not getting any secret briefing, right? They were kind of silent on that. And then what happened this morning was there started to be calls for the death penalty against whomever it was inside the Department of Defense that leaked this to the New York Times. So I want to make something really clear to all of you, because the underlying story here is not what everybody's talking about. The underlying story is who it is inside the Department of Defense who is so outraged, and justifiably so, that Elon Musk would be getting access to our highest level national security secrets without security clearance, that they called reporters at the New York Times. And I'm not going to just suggest here that there's some mobilization of resistance. Somebody on the Patreon feed this morning was like, is there a group inside the FBI or the CIA or somewhere else organizing against this? Not that we know of. But it's very clear that there is someone inside the Pentagon who was alarmed enough about this to leak it in advance. Whether or not that security briefing is actually going to take place now is anybody's guess. But I do think that at the bare minimum, it's a positive sign that there is someone in senior leadership, because the only people who would have known about this are senior leadership at the Pentagon, was alarmed enough about this to leak it to the press. And that in and of itself is not a bad thing, to be sure. And it may have a chilling effect on what Hegseth and others try to do here. Okay. But again, I have to remind you, this is one reason why exploiting the weakness that is Elon Musk is critically important right now. Again, one other thing that I should just say here is that a week from today, not a week from today, March 29th, a week from tomorrow, is a global day of action for Tesla takedown. They want protests at all of the 200 plus Tesla showrooms inside the United States and all of the Tesla showrooms, 500 or more, worldwide. It is a very good moment to get involved in that. And, you know, I'm going to say this also. Peaceful, nonviolent protest has been shown to be the fastest thing that creates change in societies. So it's a good moment to get invested in that if you can. And the other thing the Tesla takedown folks are calling for is that if you don't have a Tesla dealership where you live, you can stand on a corner with a sign that day, right? And say, boycott Tesla, or like, you know, however you want to do it. But critically important at this point that you understand that if Elon is removed from power through means affecting his economic status, that's going to clear up a whole bunch of problems, right? He also won't be in a position to get like the highest level national security secrets that he does not need. Like, the only reason that he would need those was if he was trying to exploit someone, like meaning a foreign government or our government, or have access to materials that would give him a financial advantage. Just so profoundly dangerous. That's on top of the fact that he's like a heavy ketamine user. So we'll have to see what comes of that, but I do want to remind everybody that there are indications right now that there are people inside the Pentagon that are not okay with all of this. Okay, yesterday we had a new executive order signed that is designed to essentially take the Department of Education down to the studs. Very bad, very upsetting. As I have said before, and everybody should be aware of, the Department of Education cannot be completely ended without an act of Congress. It would have to be passed as law, okay? That is not going to happen because the impact of removing the Department of Education on Republican states and districts is too high. Right now, this EO, at least from the reporting that came out yesterday, says that the provisions of the Department of Education that provide for disabled kids to get certain extra support services are not going to be taken apart. I do not believe that. I'm just going to be really honest about it. I think they're going to take, as they have done with other things, an absolute hatchet to the Department of Education, and they're going to leave it with basically nothing. Okay. I will also just let you all know that, you know, there are plenty of Republicans who voted for Donald Trump who have kids on IEPs and 504s. In public education in this country. And they're going to be really shocked, I think, to discover the way in which the cuts that are being implemented and the damage that is being done to the Department of Education is going to come to their doorsteps. Now, we already know that there's a lot of rage out there right now, including from Trump's own voters, about what Elon Musk has done. This is no exception. And just in the same way that an end to Social Security will mobilize people who voted for him against him, an end to the Department of Education, or an elimination of 90% of the Department of Education and all the funding that goes with that and all the, you know, anti-discrimination stuff so that like disabled kids get to be in the same classroom as everybody else. All that's gone, notwithstanding like they say they're going to uphold services. They're getting rid of everything that would protect kids with special needs. When all of that comes home to roost, there are going to be a lot of really pissed off parents. And so again, this is a moment that things are going to start to get very bumpy, and they're already very bumpy, but they're going to get very bumpy from the standpoint of what his own base is going to be willing to tolerate. Now, on the Patreon feed, somebody asked a question about the EOs and the Supreme Court. So let me put on my former Columbia Law School prof hat again and explain to you all that not every case gets accepted by the Supreme Court. So in order for a case challenging an EO to get to the Supreme Court, here's what has to happen. There has to be a legitimate case or controversy filed in a federal district court in the United States of America, okay? Challenging, let's just take one example. The case in front of Judge Boasberg. is challenging the EO that invokes the Alien Enemies Act that says we can deport anyone without due process if we call them a terrorist. Okay. That case, orders in that case, final order in that case, because ordinarily it's just the final order, but this is Trump and he appeals everything, would then be appealed to one of the circuit courts of appeal. Those are the regional appeals courts for the federal district courts of the United States. Okay. So just by way of example, I don't know. I should give you guys an example here, I guess. The Second Circuit Court of Appeals covers New York. I'm going to forget this, which is crazy because I used to practice in the Second Circuit all the time. It covers New York. It covers, I think, New Jersey and maybe Connecticut. Okay. The Third Circuit is like Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Maryland, I think. Virginia is in the Fourth Circuit. And so the regional circuit courts of appeal then hear the appeal. Okay. And then the losing party at that stage files what's called a writ of certiorari with the United States Supreme Court. The Supreme Court gets to decide whether or not it's going to take a case. It takes 4 justices out of 9 to put a case on the Supreme Court docket. The vast majority of writs of certiorari are denied. And ordinarily, it's like a really limited bucket that actually makes it all the way through. If a writ of certiorari is denied, I think my kid just dropped some cereal all over the floor. If a writ of certiorari is denied, what happens next is that the lower court opinion stands. Okay. So let's just say hypothetically, Boasberg enters a permanent injunction saying you cannot deport anyone without due process. That case gets appealed to the Circuit Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia. Very famous court, feeder court for the Supreme Court of the United States. And that court says, we're upholding Judge Boasberg's order. He was right. Trump and his DOJ can file a writ of certiorari to the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court says, nope, we're not taking that case, the lower court's order stands, unless they say like reversed and remanded on a per curiam decision. There's all sorts of ways in which they can do this, like if they don't like it. But generally speaking, when a writ of certiorari is denied, the appeals court decision becomes the law of the land. So not every EO is going to make it to the Supreme Court. Okay. Not every EO is going to be worthy, as deemed by 4 justices, of a review, an oral argument, and briefing in front of the entire United States Supreme Court. Some of them will, that's for sure, but not everyone. And, the real question right now and the test of what's coming next is which cases they will choose to take and at what stakes, right? So they could very well take a case related to the Alien Enemies Act. I would not be surprised to see an appeal of that. Whatever Boasberg does here, which I think is going to be a permanent injunction, I would not be surprised at all to see the Supreme Court take that up, because it is fundamentally about whether or not Trump has the authority using an EO to overturn all of U.S. immigration law and deport people without any proof that there's any basis to deport them. So again, we'll have to see how this happens, but I don't want everyone to be under the impression that every single EO is going to have to be litigated all the way to the Supreme Court. That is highly unlikely. At this point, there's, I think, 150 cases pending against the Trump administration concerning the various EOs. And there's no way, the Supreme Court docket in a given entire year, which runs from October to June, usually doesn't exceed 50 cases. So there's no way all of them will be heard. And that means that some of the lower court determinations will stand. So, I know a lot of people have a lot of fear right now about the Supreme Court, but there's simply no logistical way that SCOTUS is going to be able to review every single one of these. And actually, I think that's a good thing, because the courts have generally, with very limited exception, ruled against the Trump administration on these EOs. The only cases where they haven't, or where the plaintiffs have not asserted the need to, have not actually met the standard for emergency relief. That's where we are right now, that it's immediate and irreparable. And there's only been 2 cases like that. So again, we'll see what happens, but I would not be paranoid, in other words, that every single EO is going to be upheld by SCOTUS. It's not going to work that way. They can't do it. They don't have the bandwidth. All right. So that's a little bit of good news to consider there. Okay. Yesterday, we had An absolute capitulation to Trump by one of the nation's most famous law firms. Now, you all know that I used to practice in big law. The firm that I worked for was Stricken Levan LLP, which is no more. A couple of years ago, they collapsed, and all the attorneys that I worked with have now been integrated into other major law firms. But it was one of the top 20 law firms in the country. Paul Weiss is one of those top 20 law firms. I actually applied to work there when I was in law school. They've been around for a very long time. And strangely enough, they have a lot of former Democratic executive branch officials in their partnership. Well, apparently their chairman, who I don't know how, got very freaked by the EOs that Trump had entered against Perkins Coie, another law firm that used to be Mark Elias's firm before he went out on his own, and Paul Weiss, met with the Trump administration and decided essentially to cave. What they did was they promised that they would not engage in any DEI of any kind, that they would do pro bono work for conservative causes that were relevant to the Trump administration's policies, that they would no longer essentially seek to defy the Trump administration. And they truly bent the knee. This hit like an atomic bomb on the legal profession last night. I can't even tell you how many lawyers I follow who were just legitimately stunned. And it looks as though the chairman of Paul Weiss did this without getting the approval of the partnership. And I have real questions now about what happens next. Now, this has set off a series of events because there are now reports of associates at other law firms threatening to quit if their law firms don't stand up and refuse to kowtow to Trump. But in addition to this, I think we're going to see a lot of fallout. Sorry, the wind was just blowing and I thought I heard somebody screaming, but it's the wind. We're going to see a lot of fallout from the senior leadership of Paul Weiss in the next few days. I would not be at all surprised to see some of the partners that are former Obama administration officials, former Biden administration officials, like quit, full stop. It's that bad. And, just in the same way that we are seeing universities start to capitulate to Trump, we're also starting to see that inside some law firms. And it is really, really awful. Because if the rule of law doesn't stand, right, and if lawyers don't stand for the Constitution, all bets are off. And so, the other thing that's just really fascinating about this, just from an intellectual standpoint, is that Paul Weiss just sank itself in terms of business. Because who is actually going to want to work for a law firm that says that they will submit their legal advice to the whim of a dictator? That they will not uphold the law based on the law itself, or uphold the law based on their own oaths to the Constitution that every lawyer has to take, but on the basis of what Trump thinks they should be doing with their law firm. Nobody I know would bring business to a law firm that has now publicly announced that. So it's a very, very big deal. And you're going to hear more about it. And it is certainly incentivizing other lawyers to speak out about it. George Conway last night went off and actually published his personal text message to the chairman of another law firm who he thought was involved in this negotiation. Rough. And George and others called for every person at Paul Weiss who disagreed with this to quit. I would not be surprised to see that law firm dwindle very rapidly, but you should be aware that that's happening. And also that there are other law firms who are absolutely refusing, which is good news. Okay. Quick note that the town halls involving Republican representatives are really a place of great interest at the moment. That's putting it mildly. If you have missed the wild boos, the swearing, the calls for them to fight back or resign, you should go check them out. Literally every town hall right now that's being held by a Republican is being overwhelmed with outraged citizens, including in places that went 46% for Donald Trump. So there's an enormous amount of rage happening right now. And it's growing. And that, by the way, is one reason why we're seeing the speed increase in what Trump and the administration is trying to do, because they know what they're doing is so wildly unpopular. And so this is the other thing I want to remind you all of. They are moving quickly because they know they're vulnerable, because they know that they're losing now even their own base. And that's reason for hope. Okay. It's not a reason to stop doing whatever you're doing to organize where you live, but they know they've got a problem. when they've got Republicans showing up to Republican town halls to scream about Social Security and veterans benefits and how much they hate Elon Musk. Chants that said deport Elon broke out yesterday at one Republican rep's town hall. They're trying to get it all done because they know that like they have a problem and it's a big one. So that's something to keep your eyes on. All right. We did have a really good court order yesterday that I don't want to neglect mentioning, which ordered Musk and his little guys, the Nazi Youth Brigade, as we've come to refer to them, completely out of the Social Security Administration. They are not allowed to access any data. They are not allowed to participate in any way in any of the administration of the SSA. Right now, they're stopped. And I know that a lot of us have questions about, like, how can they really be stopped? Well, they've been ordered out. And they asked for, like, you know, ways that they maybe could, like, be in charge of some of it without violating the court's order. And the court was like, no. Nobody who has been involved in dismantling this against the law is allowed to be in charge. So this, again, is a good development in terms of like the Social Security Administration and our data. And yes, they will probably still try to breach it. And yes, then we will have hearings related to contempt. But I am very pleased with the decision. It's a really big deal. And it was a very big win. And I think all of our followers here who are on Social Security should know about it because it definitely is a step in the right direction. Okay, final question. I was asked today about international travel. And, you know, there are reasons right now to be very concerned about what's happening in the context of ICE and the border. We have seen multiple reports now of people traveling to the United States from other countries, getting detained unlawfully, getting stuck in our detention camps. There have been reports of a Canadian tourist, a Welsh tourist, that's on top of Mahmoud Khalil being detained unlawfully. A Georgetown University student was picked up yesterday unlawfully. You know, we have a multitude of reports now of ICE operating in ways that are outside the bounds of the law. And one of the things that has been raised in the activist communities that I'm talking to is the prospect of Americans who leave the country for vacation or whatever, who have prominent profiles as activists, potentially being detained when they try to return. Now, I want to make something really clear. The law says that if you are an American citizen, they have to let you in. The law says that if you are returning to the United States and you are a US citizen, they have to let you in. Does that mean they're not going to detain you and like interview you? No. Does it mean they might not seize your phone or your laptop? No. Doesn't mean that either. It does technically mean that they're supposed to let you in, but I will just tell you all that I personally think right now kind of all bets are off. Unless and until we see what Boasberg has to do with this deportation situation, I have concerns. And I say that as someone who has family members living overseas. And also, you know, I have friends and family who travel overseas routinely. I have really serious concerns right now about what it's going to mean for people who have a significant social media profile that is anti-Trump. Because we know that people have been detained at the border and interrogated already, even as US citizens, about their views on the administration. And so the Electronic Frontier Foundation has put out a booklet, and you can go Google this, about your rights at the border if you are coming into the United States. And if you happen to be doing any international travel anytime in the near future, you should do a risk evaluation, okay? If you're not somebody with like a massive social media profile, there are steps that you can take to make sure that like you're not going to unwittingly run into trouble, okay? Like for instance, there was a French academic who was coming to Houston for a conference. They opened up his social media, seized his phone, opened up his social media, saw that he had made comments that were anti-Trump and sent him back. They didn't let him into the country. So you should follow the advice of the Electronic Frontier Foundation about this. They have recommendations about taking biometric data off your phone. That means no opening it with your face. That, you know, there are recommendations about logging out of social media accounts and the like. But, you know, again, I would be remiss if I didn't say to everybody, please be cautious right now, okay? Because they are threatening to deport US citizens to concentration camps. And they are doing it on the basis of the exercise of free speech. So again, I'm not going to suggest that everyone here is like, you know, a high profile figure, let alone someone who is an immigrant, because that's clearly who they're targeting first. All right. But I would also be remiss if I didn't say that I think there's reason to be concerned And I will just be really honest here because I was directly asked this question. I had a planned overseas trip coming up that I have canceled because I am personally concerned enough about the very small percentage chance, given who they're currently targeting, but a percentage chance nonetheless that I could be detained. And I don't want that to happen. And I don't want to put my kids through that. And so I've made my own risk evaluation that I'm not taking that trip. Now, that may change in the future, depending on what happens with the courts and how this all gets enforced. And I will also say that, you know, I have friends who came home from New Zealand yesterday, some of whom have done mobilization work, who, you know, went right through immigration with no problems. Okay. So it's not like the risk at the moment is terribly high. And simultaneously, we would be very foolish. I mean, this is the point Mariam Kaba made the other night. We would be very foolish to not recognize that any and all of us could be rounded up and deported at any time, given what they're doing, that we could be disappeared simply because they don't like us or because they don't like what we've said. They are acting like the First Amendment doesn't exist. They're operating outside the bounds of due process. And so each of us has to be wise about how we make decisions right now about our own risk profile. And I don't think this is going to apply to every single American, right? I'm not suggesting that. But I do think that it's worth being cautious. And so I'm going to direct you all to the Electronic Frontier Foundation so you can look at that brochure about what to do at the border, okay? And I'm also just going to remind you all that Canada, the United Kingdom, and Germany in the last 48 hours have issued travel warnings to their citizens concerning travel to the United States, that it is not safe to travel here right now, that they should not assume if they have a visa that they're not going to be detained or denied entry, and that they should use extreme caution in traveling to the United States. Okay. So other folks have recognized that this is a very dangerous situation. And also there's a fine line to determine here based on your own risk profile. And again, I'll remind you all, the Progressive Safety Alliance has tools that are available to you online to evaluate your own risk. Okay. Obviously, people of color, immigrants, folks who, you know, have gotten up the ire of the administration are higher up on the list than others. And again, you've got to be really cautious about this because, you know, there's not kind of like a huge reason for the average white person right now to be panicked, which is also a part of the problem, right? We know who they're targeting. And simultaneously, I think it is a moment to be very concerned, like very, very concerned. And I will just say to the person who just joined in the chat, who is a trans woman, given what they have done to gender markers on the US passports and the way in which the Trump administration was denying passports to people with an X gender marker or returning them with the gender that was assigned to people at birth, regardless of their gender identity, that raises flags for me. I'll just be really honest. It raises flags for me. I think that that's it has the potential, depending on what the orders are that are given to ICE, to cause problems. So, again, this is a fluid situation. You know, again, I'm just going to say it like, you know, I may decide to go visit my brother in Paris at some point, but I'm not doing it right now. And I think it's really critical to just be mindful of where we're at. All right. Okay, that's it for today. There will be a Progressive Coffee Hour for our Patreon subscribers this weekend. If you want to join us for that, it's our weekly, like, loosey-goosey broadcast, Ask Me Anything kind of thing. It's really fun. Patreon subscribers only. You can head over to patreon.com/resistancelive and become a subscriber for as little as $5 a month. And as always, please like this broadcast, subscribe if you haven't already, drop me a comment if you are watching on the replay, because it tells the algorithm that you like what we're doing here. And I just wish you all a lot of love and safety. I have some thoughts about how to survive this moment that are in my Substack today. Newsletter with ecm.substack.com. That's free for everybody. And you can go read it. I think it's really important to not forget that we need happiness and joy right now, that the antidote to fascism is joy and continuing to live and working together to protect the most vulnerable. And we can't lose sight of that. We can't allow them to terrorize us into isolation, because then they win. So please get out there this weekend and have some fun, connect with your people, dance, go for a walk, listen to music, pet your dog, hang out with your kids or your grandkids or your friends' kids, if that's your thing. And, you know, find some peace, okay? Because it's really going to help us all to keep going. All right, my friends, lots of love to all of you, and I will catch you all back here on Monday at regular time. Take care, everyone.